The Great Hall of the Galactic Assembly was the largest structure ever built by living beings. It floated in the empty space between three star systems, and its walls were made of crystal that glowed with soft blue light. Inside, thousands of alien delegates sat in their seats, arranged in a massive circle that stretched for miles. Each species had their own section, their own flags, their own place in the order of the galaxy. At the very bottom of this grand hall, in the smallest section with the fewest seats, sat the human delegation. Ambassador stood at the center of the speaking platform. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had served humanity for 40 years, and in all that time he had learned one simple truth. The galaxy did not respect humans. It tolerated them. It used them, but it never respected them. Today he hoped that would change. "Honored delegates," said, his voice calm and clear. "Humanity has been a member of this assembly for 300 years. In that time we have fought in your wars. We have built your stations. We have healed your sick and fed your hungry. We have given everything we have to this union of species." The hall was quiet. Thousands of alien eyes watched him. Some were curious, most were bored. "We ask for one thing in return," continued. "Equal voting rights. The same voice that every other species enjoys. Nothing more, nothing less." For a moment there was silence. Then the laughter began. It started with a species of tall, thin creatures with silver skin and 4 arms. Their delegate, a female named, leaned forward in her seat and let out a high, sharp laugh that echoed through the hall. "Equal voting rights," she said, "for humans." More laughter joined hers. All of them laughed. The sound filled the great hall like a storm. Stood still, he did not move, he did not speak, he simply waited. High Counselor, the leader of the assembly, raised one of his many tentacles to quiet the crowd. He was old, even by the standards of his species, and his purple skin had faded to a dull gray. He looked down with eyes that held no warmth. "Ambassador," said, "humanity is a young species. You have only been traveling the stars for a few centuries. They have been here for 10,000 years. The for 20,000. How can you compare yourselves to such ancient peoples?" "We do not compare ourselves to anyone," replied. "We simply ask for fairness." "Fairness?" stood up from her seat. "Your species still fights among itself. You still have wars on your own worlds. You are violent, unpredictable, and dangerous. We let you into this assembly as a kindness. Do not mistake that kindness for equality." The words hit like stones. He had heard them before many times. Every human diplomat had. They were the same words spoken in different languages by different mouths for 300 years. Looked around the hall. He saw the faces of 1,000 different species. Some looked away. Some smiled. A few, very few, looked at him with something like sympathy, but none of them spoke in his defense. None of them stood up to say that humanity deserved better. He thought of his daughter, who worked on a mining station at the edge of known space. She worked twice as hard as any alien for half the pay, because humans were considered cheap labor. He thought of his son, who had died in a war that was not his own, fighting for species that would not even remember his name. He thought of Earth, that small blue world so far away, where billions of people lived and dreamed and hoped that one day the galaxy would see them as equals. Reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. It was a translator, given to every ambassador so they could understand and be understood by all species. He held it up for everyone to see. Then he dropped it on the floor. The sound was small, just a soft click of metal against stone. But in the silence of the great hall, it was as loud as thunder. "What are you doing?" demanded. Did not answer. Instead, he turned and walked toward the exit. His footsteps echoed in the quiet. Every eye in the hall followed him. "Ambassador," shouted, "you cannot simply leave. This is the Galactic Assembly. No species has ever walked out of these halls." Stopped at the door. He turned and looked back at the thousands of faces staring at him. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, in a voice that was soft but carried to every corner of the great hall, he spoke. For 300 years we asked for respect. For 300 years you gave us contempt. We built your ships. We mined your fuel. We died in your wars. And still you laugh at us. He paused and let his words sink in. We are done asking. He turned and walked through the door. Behind him the hall exploded in noise. Delegates shouted. Some demanded he be stopped. Others called for punishment, but no one moved to follow him. Outside, a human shuttle waited, climbed aboard and found his aide, a young woman named, waiting for him with wide eyes. Sir, she whispered, what have you done? Sat down heavily in his seat. He looked out the window at the great hall, that monument to galactic unity and cooperation. Then he closed his eyes. I did what should have been done long ago, he said. I told them no. The shuttle lifted off and flew into the darkness of space. Behind them, the Galactic Assembly continued to shout and argue and demand answers, but no answers came. On every human world, on every station, on every ship, the message spread. The ambassador had walked out. Humanity had left the assembly. No one knew what would happen next. No one knew what the future held. But for the first time in 300 years, humanity had stood up for itself. And the galaxy, whether it knew it or not, had just made a terrible mistake. Admiral was sleeping when the message arrived. She had been asleep for only 2 hours, which was normal for her. Running the human fleet was hard work, and there was never enough time for rest. The sound of her communicator woke her. She opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling of her small cabin. For a moment, she hoped it was nothing important, just a routine report, just another day of keeping the peace in a galaxy that did not want humans around. But she knew better. Messages at this hour were never routine. She sat up and pressed the button on her communicator. The face of her second in command, a young man named, appeared on the screen. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with something that looked like fear. Admiral, he said, you need to see this. Got dressed quickly and walked to the command center of her ship. The room was filled with officers, all of them staring at their screens with the same shocked expression. No one spoke. No one moved. They just watched. On the main screen was a recording of Ambassador walking out of the Galactic Assembly. Watched it 3 times. She watched him drop the translator. She watched him speak those final words. She watched him leave the Great Hall while thousands of aliens shouted behind him. When the recording ended, she turned to her crew. They looked at her with questions in their eyes. What now? What do we do? What does this mean? Took a deep breath. She had served in the human fleet for 30 years. She had fought in battles that no one remembered. She had buried friends who died for species that did not care. And in all that time, she had waited for this moment. Send the signal, she said. Blinked Admiral. Protocol Omega said. Send it to every human ship, every station, every colony. Send it everywhere. Protocol Omega. The words hung in the air like smoke. Every officer in the room knew what they meant. It was the plan that had been created in secret decades ago. The plan that no one ever thought would be used. The plan for humanity to disappear. Within hours, the signal reached every corner of the galaxy. Human traders received it on their ships and stopped what they were doing. Human workers received it on alien stations and put down their tools. Human soldiers received it on foreign battlefields and lowered their weapons. And then they all began to move. On the planet, the capital world of the Empire, humans worked in every factory, every hospital, every power station. They had been brought there as workers, as servants, as cheap labor that they did not want to do themselves. When the signal came, they stopped working. They packed their bags, and one by one they walked to the transport stations and boarded ships that would take them away. They watched with confusion. What was happening? Where were the humans going? Some tried to stop them, some demanded answers, but the humans did not fight. They did not argue. They simply smiled and said goodbye. By the end of the first day, there was not a single human left on. The same thing happened on 100 other worlds. On Prime, where humans ran the communication networks. On Station, where humans maintained the engines that kept the station alive. On 7, where humans farmed the food that fed millions. Everywhere, humans disappeared. The aliens did not understand at first. They thought it was some kind of protest, a temporary action, something that would end in a few days when the humans calmed down. But the days passed, and the humans did not return. Admiral led her fleet to the edge of human space. Behind her came thousands of civilian ships filled with humans from every corner of the galaxy. They were tired, they were scared, but they were going home. Stood on the bridge of her ship and watched the stars pass by. Beside her stood, who had not slept in 3 days. "Admiral," he said, "the aliens are sending messages. Hundreds of them. They want to know what is happening. They want to negotiate." Did not turn from the window. Do not answer. "But Admiral, they are offering." I said do not answer. Fell silent. He understood. This was not a negotiation. This was not a bargaining tactic. This was humanity showing the galaxy what their silence looked like. Back in the Galactic Assembly, chaos was spreading. High Counselor called emergency meetings. Delegates shouted at each other, trying to decide what to do. Some wanted to send ships after the humans. Some wanted to offer them better terms. Some wanted to wait and see. But while they argued, the galaxy began to fall apart. The factories stopped running. The workers who replaced the humans did not know how to operate the machines. They had never needed to learn. Production fell by half in the first week, and by the second week it stopped completely. On Prime, the communication networks failed. The aliens who tried to fix them did not understand the systems. They had been built by humans, maintained by humans, and without humans, they were just metal and wire. On Station, the engines began to fail. The station started to drift, slowly at first, then faster. Emergency crews worked day and night, but they could not stop it. By the end of the month, the station had to be evacuated. Species that had never spoken to each other began to fight. Trade routes that had been open for centuries closed. Old enemies remembered old grudges, and everywhere the question was the same. Where are the humans? In the quiet of human space, Ambassador sat in a small room and watched the reports come in. He saw the factories close. He saw the stations fail. He saw the galaxy tear itself apart. His aide brought him tea and sat beside him. "Do you think they will come to us?" she asked. Took a sip of his tea. It was hot and bitter just the way he liked it. "Yes," he said, "they will come, but not yet. First, they need to understand what they have lost. And if they do not understand..." Set down his cup and looked at the screen, where another report showed another alien world falling into crisis. His face was calm, but his eyes were hard. "Then they will learn the hard way," he said. "They wanted us to be silent. Now they have their wish. Let them enjoy the silence while it lasts." Outside the window, the stars burned cold and bright. Human ships patrolled the borders of their space, letting no one in and no one out. And across the galaxy, in 1,000 different languages, beings began to realize a simple truth. They had never understood how much they needed humans. And now it was too late. 6 weeks had passed since the humans left. 6 weeks of chaos, confusion, and growing fear. And in the Great Hall of the Galactic Assembly, the delegates had finally stopped arguing. Now they were begging. High Counselor stood at the speaking platform, his tentacles hanging limp at his sides. He looked older than he had 6 weeks ago. His purple skin had turned almost gray, and his eyes were filled with exhaustion. "We must reach out to the humans," he said. "We must offer them whatever they want." The delegate rose from her seat. Her silver skin had lost its shine. Her 4 arms hung at her sides instead of moving with their usual grace. The pride that had filled her voice when she laughed at Ambassador was gone. "I agree," she said quietly. "We were wrong." Those 3 words fell into the silence of the hall like stones into water. The Never admitted they were wrong. In 10,000 years of history, they had never once apologized to any species. But now their factories were silent, their economy was dying, and they had finally learned something that humans had known for centuries. Pride did not fill empty stomachs. Across the galaxy, the same lessons were being learned. Though with their great libraries and ancient wisdom, had always looked down on humans as primitive creatures. But those primitive creatures had designed their computer systems. Without human engineers to maintain them, the libraries had gone dark. 20,000 years of knowledge, locked away behind screens that no one could fix. The who called themselves the greatest warriors in the galaxy had always used humans to build their weapons. Now their shipyards were empty. Their fleet sat idle, and their enemies, sensing weakness, had begun to circle. The who had conquered 30 worlds and built an empire of fear had always relied on human farmers to feed their people. Now those farms sat empty. Food supplies ran low. And for the first time in 1,000 years, they knew what hunger felt like. In the assembly, a young delegate named stood up. He was from a small species called the who had never treated humans badly. They had always traded fairly, always shown respect. "We tried to warn you," said. His voice was soft, but in the silence of the hall everyone heard him. "We told you that humans were not servants. We told you they were partners, but you did not listen." Looked at the young delegate with tired eyes. "You are right," he said. "We did not listen, and now we pay the price." Far away, on a small human colony called New Sol, Admiral received reports from her scouts. The aliens were falling apart faster than anyone had expected. Wars had broken out on the borders of 3 empires. Trade had stopped almost completely. And everywhere, species that had once been enemies were now fighting over the scraps of a broken economy. Shared the reports with Ambassador, who had become something of a leader among the human people. Not officially. There was no vote, no ceremony. But when he spoke, people listened. When he made decisions, people followed. "They are suffering," said, "more than we expected." Nodded slowly. He was sitting by a window, looking out at the stars. His daughter sat beside him, no longer working on that distant mining station. She had come home with the others, and now she helped her father plan for the future. "Good," said, her voice was hard. "Let them suffer. They made us suffer for 300 years. Put his hand on her shoulder. "I understand your anger," he said. "I share it, but anger is not a strategy. We need to think about what comes next." "What comes next?" asked. "We stay here, we build our own worlds, we forget about them." "That is one option," said, "but there is another." He stood up and walked to a screen on the wall. With a touch, he brought up a map of the galaxy. It showed human space, a small section marked in blue, and around it the territories of 100 other species, all marked in different colors. "We could hide here forever," said. "We have enough resources. We have enough people. We could build walls around our space and never speak to the aliens again." Bud asked. "But that is not who we are." Touched the screen and the colors began to change. The borders between species shifted. New lines appeared. Humans have always been explorers, builders, dreamers. We do not hide from challenges, we face them. Frowned. "You want to go back, after everything they did to us?" "I want to change everything," said. "The old system is broken. The assembly treated us like servants because we let them. We worked in their factories and fought in their wars because we thought we had no choice." He turned to face his daughter, his admiral, his people. "But we do have a choice. We always did. And now, for the first time, the galaxy is ready to listen." Back in the assembly, the debates continued. Some species wanted to send ships to force the humans to return, But wiser voices pointed out that humans had built those ships. They knew every weakness, every flaw. A war with humanity would be a war they could not win. Other species wanted to wait. Perhaps the humans would come back on their own. Perhaps things would return to normal. But the delegate understood the truth. Nothing will go back to normal, he said. The humans have shown us what we really are: dependent, weak, lost without them. If we want them to come back, we must offer them something we have never offered before. What? Asked. Looked around the hall at the faces of 1,000 species. Some were angry, some were scared, some were ashamed. Respect, he said simply. True respect, not words, not promises, but real change, a new assembly, a new order, where humans are not servants but equals. The hall fell silent. For a long moment no one spoke. Then slowly, one by one, the delegates began to nod. It would not be easy. Thousands of years of pride and prejudice could not be erased in a day. But for the first time, the galaxy was willing to try. On New Sol received the message. The assembly wanted to talk. They were ready to negotiate. He read the message 3 times. Then he looked at and who were waiting for his response. What do you think? He asked. Thought for a moment. I think they are desperate, and desperate people make promises they cannot keep. Crossed her arms. I do not trust them. Smiled. It was a small smile, tired but genuine. Neither do I, he said. But that is why we will not simply accept their offer. We will make our own terms. And this time we will not ask. He turned back to the screen and began to write his response. The words were simple, clear, and left no room for argument. Humanity would return to the assembly, but not as members, as founders of a new order, and any species that did not accept these terms would be left behind. The message was sent. The galaxy held its breath, and in the great hall of the assembly, the delegates realized that the humans they had laughed at 6 weeks ago were now in control. The universe had changed, and there was no going back. The message from humanity spread across the galaxy like fire. Every species received it. Every government read it. Every being with access to a screen saw the words that would change everything. We will return, but not as servants, not as workers, not as the species you laughed at and used for 300 years. We will return as equals, or we will not return at all. These are our terms. Accept them or face the future alone. The message was signed by Ambassador, Admiral, and a council of human leaders that no alien had ever heard of. But it was another name that caught the attention of the galaxy. No one knew who she was. No record of her existed in any alien database. But her name appeared at the bottom of the message, alongside a title that made the delegates of the assembly tremble. Director of Human External Affairs. In the days that followed, became the voice of humanity. She appeared on screens across the galaxy, broadcasting messages that were calm, clear, and terrifying in their honesty. You ask why we left, she said in her first broadcast. Her face was young, but her eyes were old. She had dark hair that fell to her shoulders and a voice that carried the weight of centuries. The answer is simple. We were tired. Tired of being treated like tools. Tired of being laughed at. Tired of dying for species that did not remember our names. She paused and looked directly into the camera. Billions of aliens watched her, and for a moment it felt like she was speaking to each one personally. We asked for respect. You gave us contempt. Now watch your empire crumble without us. The words hit like a hammer. On world after world, aliens watched their governments struggle. Leaders who had seemed so powerful now looked weak and lost. Systems that had worked for thousands of years were falling apart. Riots broke out in the streets. The people demanded answers. Why had the humans left? Why had the government let this happen? The leaders had no answers. They had spent so long looking down on humans that they had never bothered to understand them. On Prime, the Great Council of Elders met in emergency session. They had always believed that knowledge was power, But now they realized that knowledge without the ability to use it was worthless. Their computers were dark, their records were locked away, and the humans who could fix them were gone. The greatest warriors in the galaxy faced an enemy they could not fight. Their ships sat idle because there was no one to repair them. Their weapons were useless because there was no one to build more. And their enemies, sensing blood in the water, began to attack. In 1 week they lost 3 border systems. In 2 weeks they lost 7. Their empire, built on 1,000 years of conquest, was crumbling like sand. Watched all of this from a small office on New Sol. She had screens on every wall showing feeds from across the galaxy. Each screen told the same story: chaos, fear, desperation. Her aide, a young man named, brought her coffee and stood beside her. "They are falling faster than we expected," he said. Nodded. "They always relied on us more than they knew. Now they are learning the truth." "Some of them are angry," said. "They are talking about war. They say they will take what they need by force." Smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Let them try. Admiral has positioned our fleet at the border. If they attack, they will learn that humans are not just good at building ships. We are good at using them too." The threat of war hung over the galaxy like a dark cloud. Some species wanted to fight. They could not accept that humans, those simple, primitive creatures, had brought them to their knees. Their pride demanded blood. But others understood the truth. War with humanity would be suicide. In the assembly, High Counselor called for calm. "We must negotiate," he said. "We must accept their terms." "Accept their terms." A general named slammed his fist on the table. He was massive, even by standards, with scales that gleamed like black metal. We do not surrender to lesser species." "They are not a lesser species," the delegate said quietly. "They never were. We just told ourselves they were because it made us feel better about using them." Turned on him with fury in his eyes. "You dare!" "He speaks the truth." The voice came from the delegate. She stood up slowly, her 4 arms hanging at her sides. All the pride that had filled her when she laughed at Ambassador was gone. In its place was something that looked almost like shame. "I laughed at them," she said. "I called them primitive, violent, unworthy of equality, and now my world is dying because we cannot run our own factories." She looked around the hall at the faces of 1,000 species. "We did this to ourselves. We treated them like servants, and now we are surprised that they left. The only question is whether we are wise enough to admit our mistake or foolish enough to make it worse." The hall fell silent. Hands clenched into fists, but he did not speak. Even the proudest warrior knew when he was beaten. Back on New Sol, received word that the assembly had accepted humanity's terms. They would create a new council, with humans as founding members. They would give humans full voting rights, equal representation, and control over their own affairs. It was everything humanity had asked for, everything they had dreamed of for 300 years. But knew it was not enough. She called a meeting with and the other human leaders. They gathered in a small room with no windows, just screens showing the state of the galaxy. "They have agreed to our terms," said, "but words are cheap. They promised us respect before and they lied. What makes this time different?" Leaned back in his chair. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. "Nothing makes it different. They are afraid now, so they will say anything. But when the fear fades, they will forget." "Then what do we do?" asked. She had joined the council at her father's request. She was young, but she understood politics better than most. Admiral spoke up. "We make sure they cannot forget. We do not return as partners. We return as something more." "What do you mean?" asked. Stood and pointed to the map on the screen. "Right now, they need us to survive. Their factories, their stations, their fleets, all of it depends on human knowledge and human labor. We hold all the power." She traced a line across the map. "We do not give that power away. We use it. We return, but we set the rules. We control the technology. We decide who gets access and who does not. Looked at the map for a long moment. Then she smiled. It was a cold smile, the smile of someone who had learned hard lessons and would not forget them. You want us to become what they were, she said. The ones in control. No, said. I want us to become something better. They use their power to oppress. We will use ours to protect, but we will never be weak again. The room fell silent. Everyone understood what this meant. Humanity would not just rejoin the galaxy, they would reshape it. And the galaxy, watching from afar, began to understand something terrible. The humans they had feared were coming back. But this time, they would not be asking for permission. The day humanity returned to the galaxy was the day everything changed. Captain Minu stood on the bridge of the human flagship, a massive vessel called the Dawn of Earth. Around him, a fleet of over 1,000 ships moved in perfect formation. They were not the largest ships in the galaxy. They were not the most heavily armed. But they were human ships, built by human hands, crewed by human hearts. And they were going home. Captain, his navigator said, we are approaching the assembly station. Minu looked at the screen. The great hall of the Galactic Assembly floated in the void ahead, its crystal walls glowing with soft blue light. For 300 years, humanity had come here as servants. They had begged for scraps. They had accepted insults. They had watched other species laugh at them. Today would be different. All ships, Minu said, his voice calm and steady, hold formation. We enter together. Behind him, Admiral watched with quiet pride. She had trained Minu herself, years ago, when he was just a young officer with big dreams. Now he commanded the largest human fleet ever assembled. You have come a long way, she said. Minu turned to her and smiled. We all have. The fleet entered the space around the assembly station. Inside the great hall, thousands of alien delegates watched through the crystal walls. They saw the human ships fill the sky, blocking out the light of distant stars. For a long moment, no one spoke. No one moved. They just watched. High Counselor stood at the speaking platform. His tentacles trembled and his voice was weak. They are here, he said. May the stars have mercy on us all. The doors of the great hall opened, and the human delegation entered. Ambassador led the way. He walked slowly, his steps measured, his head held high. Behind him came Director, Admiral, and Captain Minu. Behind them came 100 human representatives, chosen from every colony, every station, every ship. They walked past the alien delegates, past the seats where they had once sat in the smallest section at the bottom of the hall. They did not stop there. They kept walking up the stairs, past the middle rows, all the way to the top. To the seats of the High Council. Stepped back as approached. Ambassador, he said, please, you can have anything you want, just tell us what we must do. Stopped and looked at the old counselor. For a moment, something like pity crossed his face. Then it was gone. We do not want anything from you, said. We already have everything we need. He turned and faced the hall. Thousands of alien faces looked up at him. Some were afraid. Some were angry. A few were hopeful. All of them were waiting. For 300 years, said, his voice carrying to every corner of the great hall, humanity served this assembly. We built your ships. We grew your food. We fought your wars. And in return, you gave us nothing but contempt. He paused and let his words sink in. We did not leave because we were weak. We left because we were strong. Strong enough to walk away from everything we had built. Strong enough to start over. Strong enough to show you what the galaxy looks like without us. The hall was silent. Not even the proudest delegate dared to speak. Now we return, continued. But not as members of your assembly, not as servants waiting for your approval. We return as founders of something new. Stepped forward and activated a device in her hand. A hologram appeared above the speaking platform, showing a new structure. It was not like the old assembly with its tiers and its rankings and its unequal votes. This structure was different. equal sections, equal voices, equal power. This is the new council, said, a place where every species has the same voice, where no one is laughed at for asking for respect, where strength comes from cooperation, not domination. The delegates looked at the hologram with wide eyes. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others leaned forward with interest. "You want to replace the assembly?" asked. Her voice was quiet, almost humble. "We want to build something better," replied. "The assembly was built on power and fear. The new council will be built on trust and respect, but trust must be earned." She looked around the hall. "You can join us, or you can try to continue without us. The choice is yours." Admiral stepped forward. Her uniform was sharp, her posture perfect. She looked like what she was, a warrior who had never lost a battle. "But know this," she said. "If you choose to fight us, you will lose. Not because we are stronger, not because we have more ships, but because you have already shown us that you cannot survive without us." She pointed to the screens around the hall which showed images from across the galaxy. Factories standing empty, stations falling apart, worlds on the edge of collapse. "This is what your galaxy looks like without humans. Broken, dying, lost. We did not do this to you. You did it to yourselves." The hall fell into heavy silence. Delegates looked at each other, searching for answers. For thousands of years, they had believed they were the masters of the galaxy. Now a young species, one they had dismissed as primitive and violent, was offering them a future they could not build alone. Finally, the delegate stood up. He was small, even among his own kind, but his voice was clear. "The accept," he said. "We will join the new council." One by one, other delegates rose. The smaller species from the outer systems, even some of the led by herself, stood and declared their acceptance. Watched as his assembly fell apart around him. Then slowly he bowed his head. "The old ways are over," he said quietly. "We accept." Only the remained seated. General glared at the human delegation with hatred in his eyes, but he was alone. His allies had abandoned him. His fleet was broken. He had no choice. With a growl of rage, he stood and walked out of the hall. His footsteps echoed in the silence, growing fainter until they disappeared. Watched him go. Then he turned to the remaining delegates. "Today is not about victory," he said. "It is not about revenge. Today is about the future. A future where no species is treated as less than another. A future where we build together instead of tearing each other apart." He raised his hand and the hologram changed. It showed the galaxy as it could be, trade routes restored, stations rebuilt, worlds working together. "This is what we offer," said. "Not domination, not control, partnership, true partnership with no one above and no one below." Captain Minu stood by the window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, his family waited. His mother, who had worked in alien factories all her life. His father, who had died in an alien war. They had dreamed of a day like this. "We did it," he whispered. Beside him, his daughter, who served as his communications officer, put her hand on his shoulder. "No," she said, "we are just beginning." Outside the great hall, the human fleet held position. Their ships were small against the vastness of space, but they carried something greater than weapons or shields. They carried hope. Hope for a galaxy that had forgotten what it meant to treat others with respect. Hope for species that had never known anything but competition and fear. Hope for a future where humanity did not just survive. They thrived. And as the stars burned bright against the endless dark, the galaxy watched, not with dread this time, not with fear. With wonder. The humans had returned, and nothing would ever be the same.